It's hard to believe already, but we're already in week 16 of the National Football League. And the best part is there was no shutdown or late start to the season. I'll get you caught up with all the action that occurred in week 16. Now remember, all these games with the playoff implication. So if your team is not in the playoffs and did not play a team that was going to make the postseason, they will not be included. So under further ado, let's get into the highlights. We start off in Detroit, where the 9-5 Tampa Bay Buccaneers traveled to Detroit to take on the 5-9 Lions, who are without their head coach or interim head coach. They fired Matt Patricia, and Darrell Bevell, the interim, had to skip the game because of COVID contact tracing. But Tampa dominated the Lions with a 47-7 win. The Lions did not stand a chance. Matt Stafford and Kenny Galladay were out, and the Lions head coach for the game was Robert Prince. Prince was a wide receivers coach and never had any coaching experience. The stats were Tom Brady was 22 of 47 for 348 yards and 4 TD passes. Keyshawn Vaughn had 62 yards on the ground, and Mike Evans had 10 receptions for 181 yards and 2 TDs. For the Lions, Chase Daniels was 13 of 18 for 86 yards. DeAndre Swift had 10 attempts for 45 yards, and Danny Amendola had 37 yards receiving. 49ers versus the Cardinals. The Cardinals are still trying to make the playoffs as the 7th seed. C.J. Beathard got the start in replace of Nick Mullins. The Niners were trying to play spoiler as they already were eliminated. The 49ers took an early lead and never looked back. They had a 7-6 lead at the end of half as C.J. Beathard found Jeff Wilson in the end zone. San Fran scored 3 TDs in the second half. Kyler Murray would throw a touchdown pass to DeAndre Hopkins in the fourth quarter, but that was it for the Cardinals. They would have a fumble, interception, and 2 punts all in the second half. The 49ers would hold on to win 20-12, and the Cardinals now find themselves out of the playoffs behind the Bears, who beat the Jags to get back into the postseason. C.J. Beathard threw 3 TD passes and was 13 of 22 for 182 yards. Folks, he could be the backup quarterback over Nick Mullins. Jeff Wilson had a great game with 22 carries for 183 yards. George Kittle came back from injury and had 4 receptions for 92 yards. Kyler Murray for the Cardinals was 31 of 50 for 247 and 1 INT. Murray also had the game in rushing for the Cardinals with 9 carries for 75 yards. Christian Kirk had 7 receptions for 76 yards. Bad news for the Cardinals. Kyler Murray did leave the game with a leg injury. There's still questions on if he could play this Sunday versus the Rams, in which if they lose, they are officially out of the playoffs. They need to win. They also have the Bears needing to lose. However, if they beat the Rams, they could take the Rams spot over the playoffs. Now we go to Vegas, where the Miami Dolphins traveled and were hoping to stay in the playoffs with the win over the Raiders. The Dolphins trailed the whole first half. Vegas led Miami 13-6 for the start of the third quarter. Tagovailoa found Myles Gaskin for a 10-yard touchdown to tie the game at 13. The Raiders would score a field goal to go up 16-13. Miami decided to replace Tagovailoa with veteran quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick. Most of the action came in the fourth quarter. The Raiders got a long touchdown from Nelson Aguilar, but missed the extra point. The Dolphins would get the go-ahead touchdown as Ryan Fitzpatrick would find Myles Gaskin for 59 yards. The Raiders would get a go-ahead field goal, which they thought to go up by 2, but they gave too much time for Fitzmagic. The Raiders made a huge mistake, leaving Mike Hollins wide open, and they got flagged for putting a face mask on the former veteran quarterback from Harvard. The Dolphins would win the game on a 44-yard go-ahead field goal from Jason Saunders. Final score, the Dolphins 26, the Raiders 25. Fitzmagic led the game in passing despite only playing 1 quarter. He had 182 yards passing and 1 TD pass. Myles Gaskin rushed for 87 yards on 14 attempts and led the game in receiving as well. He had 82 yards through the air and added 2 touchdowns. For the Raiders, Derek Carr had 336 yards passing, 1 touchdown pass. Josh Jacobs had 69 yards on 13 attempts, and Nelson Aguilar had 155 yards receiving and 1 TD. Let's get to the Sunday games. The Pittsburgh Steelers hosted the Indianapolis Colts, trying to end their 3-game losing streak. If the Steelers won, they would officially clinch the AFC North. However, if they lost, they would have to play for the division against the Browns if Cleveland had won. The Colts started out fast, and the Steelers, like the last 3 games, started very slow. Indy had a 21-7 lead at the half as Phillip Rivers threw 1 touchdown and Jonathan Taylor had 2 rushing touchdowns. Pittsburgh would score after taking advantage of a Colts fumble, but here come the Steelers. They would outscore the Colts 21-3 in the second half. Big Ben would not throw 1, not 2, but 3 TD passes. The Colts couldn't answer as they would follow the Steelers 28-24. With the win, the Steelers now clinch the AFC North, and the Colts, despite a 10-5 record, are now out of the playoffs looking in. The Colts have to win next week against the Jaguars and have to have a loss from either the Dolphins, Ravens, or Browns. Roethlisberger threw for 342 yards and 3 touchdown passes. James Conner had 20 yards on 5 carries and 1 TD. Juju Smith-Schuster had 9 receptions for 96 yards and 1 receiving touchdown. Phillip Rivers was 22 of 35, 270 yards, and 1 TD. He also threw 1 interception as well. Jonathan Taylor continued to have success with 18 carries on the ground, 74 yards, and 1 touchdown. Zach Pascal had 3 receptions for 64 yards and 1 touchdown. The Baltimore Ravens were trying to get their 4th straight win with the victory over the New York Giants. Somehow the Giants, who were 5-9, still had a chance of making the playoffs with a win. Baltimore was 9-5 and had a chance of getting back in the playoffs with a win, and because the Colts and Browns both lost. The Ravens would get the job done. They had an early 23 lead at halftime as Lamar Jackson and J.K. Dobbins would both have touchdowns. The Ravens would get another touchdown in the second half as Lamar Jackson would find Dez Bryant in the end zone to go up 27-6. Bryant had his second touchdown of the season. That would be a second straight game with the receiving touchdown this year. The Giants would score to trim the game to 14 points as Daniel Jones found Sterling Shepard. However, the Giants could not answer after that, and the Ravens ended up beating the Giants 27-13. The Ravens are now back in the playoffs with the win, and both the Browns and Colts losing. Lamar Jackson was 17 of 26 for 183 yards and 2 TD passes. Gus Edwards, or Gus the Bus, had 85 yards on 15 attempts, and Mark Andrews led the way in receiving with 7 receptions for 76 yards. For the Giants, Daniel Jones was 24 of 41 for 252 yards and 1 touchdown pass. Wayne Gallman had 27 yards on the ground on 6 carries. Sterling Shepard had 6 receptions, 76 yards, and 1 TD. The Cleveland Browns traveled to the Meadowlands to take on the Jets. The Jets had just upset the Rams for their first win of the season. With the Browns, while the Browns were trying to stay in the thick of things in the AFC playoffs, they had their problems. Jarvis Landry, Rashard Higgins, and Donovan Peoples-Jones were all out. The game started out as a nightmare for the Browns. The bottom-dwelling Jets took an early 13-3 lead at the break. To make things even worse for Cleveland fans, New York scored on a trick play that went from Jamison Crowder to the other receiver, Braxton Burrows. The Jets would score again as Sam Darnold would find Jamison Crowder to go up 23. However, the Browns made a comeback. Cleveland would get a blocked field goal on Sam Ficken, and they would get a touchdown by Kareem Hunt to trim the game to 4 points. However, Cody Parkey would miss the extra point, which was huge. Baker Mayfield ended up turning the ball over twice with 2 fumbles that sealed the Jets' second win of the season. The Jets beat the Browns 23-16. Darnold wasn't great, but he was good enough to get the win. 16 of 32 for 175 yards and 2 TD passes. Frank Gore had 48 yards on the ground on 14 attempts. Jamison Crowder had 7 receptions, 92 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Last 2 games have been solid for Jamison Crowder. On the other side, Baker Mayfield was 28 of 53 for 285 yards and 2 fumbles. Nick Chubb had 28 yards on the ground and 1 TD. Austin Hooper led the way in receiving for the losing Browns with 7 receptions for 71 yards. The Atlanta Falcons versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Falcons hoped to play spoiler against the reigning Super Bowl champs, the Chiefs. The Chiefs needed a win to clinch home field advantage throughout the playoffs. Atlanta was able to shut down the Chiefs for most of the game. Falcons defense was able to force 2 punts and interception before they finally scored. The Falcons did end up scoring first and took a 7-0 lead in the half until the Chiefs scored late in the second half as Pat Mahomes would find Travis Kelce to tie the game at 7. In the third quarter, the Chiefs took a 10-7 lead thanks to a long field goal from Harrison Butker. The Falcons in the fourth quarter would score as Matt Ryan would found the former first-round pick Laquan Treadwell. However, as always, Patrick Mahomes comes back for the win. The 2018 League MVP and the 2020 Super Bowl MVP found Demarcus Robinson in the end zone to go up 17-14. Falcons drove down the field, but they missed the field goal to tie the game and go into overtime. The Chiefs beat the Falcons 17-14. Mahomes threw for 278 yards and 2 touchdowns. Darrell Williams had 46 yards on the ground. Travis Kelce had 7 receptions for 90 yards and 1 TD. Matt Ryan was 27 of 35 for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. Calvin Ridley had 5 receptions for 130 yards. Bears versus Jags. Don't look now, but the Chicago Bears are currently in the playoffs if the season ended today. Chicago controls their own destiny with the win over the Jaguars 41-17. All the Bears have to do is beat the Packers, or the Cardinals need to lose in order for them to clinch a playoff berth. The game wasn't much of a contest as the Bears rolled past the Jags. Look on the good side, though, for Jags fans, if there are any. They'll now have the number 1 pick, which they clinched, and means they'll likely draft Clemson quarterback Trevor Lawrence, who many are considering the greatest prospect ever. Jacksonville did score in their first possession, but after that was all Chicago. Mitch Trubisky could be the Bears quarterback going forward. The former number 2 overall pick threw for 265 yards on 24 of 35 passing attempts and 2 touchdowns. He also threw 1 interception. David Montgomery had 23 carries for 95 yards, and Allen Robinson had 10 receptions for 103 yards. Mike Glenn, the former Bears quarterback, was the star for the Jags and threw for 211 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and 211 yards passing. DJ Chark for the Jaguars had 4 receptions for 62 yards and 1 touchdown. The battle for one of the best divisions in all football happened on Sunday at Lumen's Field in Seattle, Washington. The Seattle Seahawks hosted their bitter rival, the LA Rams, for the NFC West title. All the Seahawks needed to do was to beat the Rams, and they would officially clinch the NFC West. The Rams needed to win both their next 2 games in order to win the NFC West and have a home playoff game. However, that would not come to fruition as the Seattle Seahawks dominated the Rams, especially in the second half. The game was tied at 6 in the first half, but here comes Russell Wilson and the Hawks. He would score a touchdown pass as he would find Jacob Hollister. He would also get a rushing touchdown. The Rams only got a field goal and would fall to Seattle 20-9. The Seahawks officially clinched the NFC West and have a home playoff game. They still have a shot for the number 1 seed if they can win and the Packers and Saints lose this Sunday. Russell Wilson was 20 of 32 for 225 yards and 1 TD pass. Chris Carson had 69 yards on the ground, and DK Metcalf had 59 yards receiving. For LA, Jared Goff, despite injuring his thumb, threw for 234 yards and 1 INT. Darrell Henderson rushed for 62 yards and 12 carries, and Cooper Kupp had 8 receptions for 86 yards. The Rams need a win on Sunday in order to officially clinch a playoff berth, or the Cardinals, well, they play the Cardinals, so they need a win to clinch a playoff berth. How about them Cowboys? With all the struggles and injuries Dallas has to deal with, they still have a chance to win the NFC Least, or the NFC East. The Dallas Cowboys got a huge win over the Philadelphia Eagles, 37-17. The Cowboys needed to win this Sunday over the Giants, and the Washington football team will have to lose the Eagles on Sunday night for them to clinch the NFC East and be in the playoffs. With the loss, the Eagles are officially eliminated. Currently, Philly is 4-10-1. After the game was over, it was reported that the Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy smashed watermelons to pump the players up. Crazy stats, the Cowboys are 2-0 when McCarthy smashes watermelons. The Eagles struck first and would even have a 14-3 lead. However, the Eagles started to struggle, and the Cowboys took a 20-17 lead going into the break. In the second half, the 3-time Super Bowl champions, Dallas Cowboys, crushed their bitter rivals. Andy Dalton threw 3 TD passes, 1 interception, and 377 yards, the most this season for him. Zeke rushed for 105 yards on 19 carries, and Marcus Gallup had 6 receptions for 121 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jalen Hurts got his 3rd career start and did not play his best game. He was 21 of 39 for 342 yards, 1 TD, and 2 interceptions. He also led the team in rushing with 69 yards. Deshaun Jackson had 1 catch for 81 yards and 1 touchdown. Final score, the Cowboys defeated the Eagles 37-17. Titans versus Packers. The Green Bay Packers host the Tennessee Titans on Sunday Night Football looking for their 12th win of the season. The Packers have already clinched the NFC North and were looking to get closer to clinching the top overall spot in the NFC. The Tennessee Titans have not clinched a playoff berth but had the 4th seed in the AFC playoffs and were looking to upset the Packers in the frozen tundra. Green Bay looked like the real deal on Sunday night. They jumped out to a 19-0 lead and forced 2 interceptions from Ryan Tannehill. The game was snowing for the entire contest, and the Titans never really got close to the Pack. The Packers would win 40-14, only need 1 more win to officially be the top seed in the NFC playoffs. They would have home field advantage if they take care of business against the Bears this Sunday. Aaron Rodgers, who many are considering the favorite to win the league MVP, had 4 touchdowns, 1 interception, threw for 231 yards, and was 21 of 25. A.J. Dillon came in the game for an injured Aaron Jones and rushed for 124 yards. He also picked up 2 touchdowns in the process. Devontae Adams had 11 receptions for 142 yards and 3 touchdowns. Ryan Tannehill struggled the entire game and only threw 121 yards on 11 of 24 passing, 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions, Derrick Henry had 98 yards on the ground, and A.J. Brown had 4 receptions for 43 yards. Bills versus the Patriots, the grand finale on Monday Night Football for the 2020 NFL season. The Bills were trying to be trying to beat the Patriots or trying to sweep the Patriots for the first time since 1999. In 1999, Belichick wasn't even the coach, and Brady was still in college at the time. But the Bills would do it, and they would dominate the Patriots with a commanding 38-9 win. Buffalo won the AFC East last week for the first time since 1995. The Pats would score on their first possession, but that was the only time they led. The newly crowned AFC East champs had a 10-9 lead in the second quarter, but here comes Josh Allen and the Bills. Allen threw 2 more touchdowns in the second quarter to go up 24-9 at the end of the first half. He threw 2 more touchdown passes in the second half, both to Stephon Diggs. Cam Newton struggled and was benched in favor of Jarrett Stidham. The Bills would beat the Patriots 38-9. Josh Allen threw for 320 yards, was 27 of 36, and 4 TD passes. Puts himself back in the MVP conversation, in my opinion. Zach Moss rushed for 57 yards on 12 carries and 1 TD. Stephon Diggs had 9 receptions, 145 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Jarrett Stidham surprisingly threw for more yards than Cam Newton did. He only played a quarter and a half and threw for 44 yards on 4 completions. Sony Michel rushed for 69 yards, and Jacoby Myers had 4 receptions for 45 yards. To the Sports Town Podcast, or the STP Pod for short. You can find us on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and much more. We release new episodes every Wednesday and Friday. Also, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Sports Town Podcast. If you want to check out more videos of the Sports Town Podcast, click on the left. If you want to subscribe to the channel, click on the right.